Daniel has been dating Sarah for 3 months, and the relationship is beginning to suffocate her in ways she's struggling to articulate. At first, Daniel's emotional attentiveness seemed wonderful. He was so interested in her feelings, so attuned to her moods, so eager to understand her inner world. But Sarah is starting to realize that Daniel doesn't actually have boundaries between himself and her emotional states. He doesn't empathize with her. He merges with her. Tonight, Sarah comes home from work in a bad mood. She had a frustrating day and just wants to decompress quietly. A partner with healthy boundaries might offer support while giving her space. Daniel immediately absorbs her bad mood as his own. Within minutes, he's more upset about her day than she is. He's asking endless questions, trying to process every detail, becoming increasingly agitated about the people who frustrated her. Sarah tries to tell him she just needs to relax and watch TV, but Daniel can't let it go. He needs to continue exploring the feelings, processing the emotions, diving deeper into the emotional content. This isn't care. This is the anima's inability to exist without emotional intensity and relational merger. Daniel needs Sarah's emotional content to feel like he exists, because without an ego, he has no center of self. He only knows himself through emotional engagement with others. Later that night, Sarah tries to create some independent time to read a book. Daniel experiences this as abandonment. Not intellectually, because he has no ego to think about it rationally. He just feels it, viscerally, as a kind of emotional death. He hovers near her, asking if she's okay, asking if he did something wrong, needing reassurance that they're still connected. Sarah is beginning to feel claustrophobic, trapped in a relationship where her partner can't allow her any psychological space. When they're intimate physically, Daniel's anima possession creates a particular kind of dynamic. He's extremely attuned to Sarah's responses, almost psychically sensitive to what she's feeling. This sounds positive, but in practice it's disturbing. Daniel has no separate desire of his own, no masculine initiation, no ego-driven intentionality. He's entirely reactive, entirely focused on her response, to the point where Sarah feels like she's having sex with an emotional mirror, rather than another person. Afterward, Daniel needs extensive emotional processing. How was it for her? What was she feeling? Did she feel connected? He needs her to verbalize her emotional experience because he has no internal experience of his own separate from hers. Sarah is exhausted by this constant need for emotional articulation and reassurance. She wants a partner, not an emotional dependent. The pattern intensifies over the following weeks. Daniel can't make decisions without checking Sarah's emotional temperature. What restaurant should they go to? He doesn't know what he wants. He wants whatever will make her happy. What should they do this weekend? He has no preferences. He just wants to feel connected to her. Sarah is beginning to realize that she's in a relationship with someone who has no self, just an emotional absorption mechanism that needs her to provide all structure, all direction, all purpose. Daniel has always considered himself artistic. He paints sometimes, writes poetry, plays guitar, but his creative output reveals the same pattern as everything else in his life. Without an ego to provide structure and direction, his creativity is all emotional outpouring with no form, all impression with no composition, all feeling with no craft. Watch him sit down to paint. A healthy artist might have a vision, an intention, some organizing principle for what they're creating. Daniel just starts applying paint based on whatever he's feeling in the moment. The painting becomes a chaotic mess of emotional expression with no coherence. It's not abstract art with intentional composition. It's just raw anima content dumped onto canvas with no mediating consciousness to shape it into something communicable. He writes poetry constantly, filling journal after journal. But the poetry is entirely solipsistic, drowning in emotion without form. Page after page of feelings about feelings about feelings, with no structure, no craft, no discipline. Jung said the anima provides creative inspiration, but that inspiration needs the ego to give it form. Daniel has inspiration without form, and the result is creative output that's self-indulgent and ultimately meaningless to anyone else. His guitar playing follows the same pattern. He noodles endlessly, following emotional impulses, never learning songs completely, never developing technique systematically. It's all immediate emotional expression with no development, no progression, no achievement. He feels deeply while playing, experiences profound emotional states, but produces nothing of value because feelings without structure don't create art. Daniel dreams of being a real artist, but his anima possession prevents him from doing the actual work that art requires. Art needs the ego to provide discipline, the persona to understand audience and communication, the shadow to provide depth and darkness. Daniel just has emotional overflow, and he mistakes that overflow for creativity. He attends open mic nights and shares his chaotic poetry, confused when audiences seem uncomfortable or unengaged. He's being so authentic, so vulnerable, so emotionally available. Why doesn't anyone respond? What he can't see is that emotional authenticity without form is just emotional exhibitionism. People don't want to be drowned in someone else's unprocessed feelings. They want art that's been shaped, refined, given structure through conscious craft. Daniel has no capacity for that conscious craft because he has no consciousness separate from the emotional content itself. Daniel sits alone in his apartment on a Friday evening. Sarah broke up with him 2 weeks ago, citing the suffocating emotional intensity and his inability to function as an independent person. Daniel has taken the breakup not as information about incompatibility or areas for growth, but as confirmation of a romantic narrative his anima has been writing. He's the misunderstood sensitive soul. She's the woman who couldn't handle real depth. And now he's the tragic figure suffering for his emotional authenticity. Watch how Daniel spends his evening. He's not processing the relationship rationally, thinking about patterns or lessons learned. He has no ego to do that processing. Instead, he's lost in elaborate emotional fantasies. He imagines Sarah realizing her mistake, coming back to him, the two of them reuniting in a scene of emotional catharsis and perfect understanding. These fantasies are vivid, consuming, more real to him than actual reality because Daniel's anima has no grounding in what Jung called the reality principle. Jung warned about anima possession in men, explaining that when the anima dominates without other structures to balance it, a man becomes moody, emotionally volatile, and increasingly detached from external reality. He lives in an inner world of feelings, impressions, fantasies, and imaginal relationships that substitute for actual human connection. Daniel is deep into this pattern now. He has conversations with an imagined Sarah in his head that are more emotionally satisfying than his conversations with the real Sarah ever were. He scrolls through old photos of them together, and each photo sends him into spirals of nostalgic feeling. He's not remembering actual events accurately. He's remembering them through a heavy filter of romantic idealization that the anima provides. Every moment was magical. Every interaction was profound. Every feeling was the deepest feeling ever felt. The anima, Jung noted, tends toward idealization and romanticization when not balanced by the ego's reality testing. Daniel begins writing Sarah long emails that he doesn't send, page after page of emotional outpouring, explaining his feelings in exhaustive detail, trying to make her understand the depth of his love, the profundity of their connection. These emails are exercises in anima possession. They're all subjective feeling with no awareness of how they might land for Sarah, no persona to shape them appropriately, no ego to ask whether sending them would actually accomplish anything beyond emotional catharsis for himself. His friends have started avoiding him because every conversation becomes an emotional processing session about Sarah. Daniel can't talk about sports, current events, work, or anything external. Every topic circles back to his feelings about the relationship, his emotional state, his inner turmoil. His friends want companionship and shared activities. Daniel needs emotional witnessing and endless processing. Without an ego to have interests beyond feeling, Daniel has become unable to participate in normal friendship. Jung spent decades studying the anima and warning men about the dangers of anima possession. The anima is essential. It provides emotional depth, intuitive knowing, connection to the unconscious, capacity for relationship. But the anima needs the ego to provide structure and boundaries. It needs the persona to function in reality. It needs the shadow to provide grounding in masculine darkness and aggression. Without these balancing structures, the anima doesn't enrich a man's consciousness. It dissolves it. Daniel represents what happens when the anima operates without any other psychological components. He has emotional sensitivity without boundaries. He has relational attunement without separate selfhood. He has intuitive feeling without rational thought. He has creative inspiration without discipline or form. The result isn't a deeply feeling, spiritually evolved man. It's a man who's lost the capacity to function in reality. Jung would say Daniel desperately needs to develop his other structures. He needs an ego that could provide a center of consciousness separate from emotional content. He needs a persona that could help him function in the external world with appropriate boundaries. He needs to integrate his shadow, to access the masculine darkness and aggression that could ground him in reality and provide counterweight to the anima's dissolution. But developing these structures would require Daniel to recognize that his anima possession isn't spiritual depth but psychological pathology. He would need to see that his emotional intensity isn't evolved consciousness, but the absence of consciousness. He would need to understand that his inability to function isn't proof of his sensitivity, but evidence of his incompleteness. And right now, drowning in anima content, Daniel can't see any of this. He just feels, endlessly, overwhelmingly, with nothing to contain the feeling or direct it toward growth. The anima is the bridge to the unconscious, to emotion, to the inner world. But a bridge needs solid ground on both ends. Without an ego to stand on, the bridge just leads to drowning. Daniel has crossed into the unconscious with no way back, consumed by the feminine archetype within him, lost in feeling without form, relationship without self, emotion without consciousness. This is the tragedy of anima possession. Not evil, not emptiness, just endless dissolution into emotional content with no structure to transform it into life.